Welcome to WGU Labs Inside the Learning Experience podcast. I'm Bethany Gross, and I'm with my guest, Christine McDonough. Christine, hi.
Hi.
Tell us about yourself.
Currently, I am a learning experience designer at WGU Labs. I am also kind of an online accessibility ambassador at WGU Labs. In my career, I have had classroom experience, a little bit of online learning training experience, and also other lives in my career that I get to draw from. I do have a master's in information design from the University of Reading in the UK. And that degree is actually looking at how do we present information to students who are going to interact with that information, and how do we do that in a way that suits them. So it's definitely sort of learner focused. So I'm excited to talk about AI these days.
So let's talk about AI tutors. I would say on the face of it, it's actually pretty easy to build a tutor. Wouldn't you say? All you need to do is load up an LLM with some content, give it a few instructions, and you have a chatbot that you can learn with and learn alongside with, right?
So yes and no. There are some that currently exist that have done that, and it is actually like a leap ahead. It's one of the next iterations in the evolution of how we do online learning. But we do have extra stuff that we're starting to add, especially with AI, to make it more dynamic. So we did a big push recently. We had this like huge project where we had different teams of learning experience designers trying to focus on different parts of the learning experience that a student has. I was personally on the assessment team, which had a coach element added to it. In that coaching element, we had to like find out what are the things that we need to do to make this literally a validated learning experience, something that actually gives the information to the student understands it, and then pass it on to an assessment to make sure that, yes, they can show mastery of that competency. Now the challenge is we are going to untangle assessment from instruction. Like instruction has some boundaries to it. Assessment has some boundaries to it. When you're looking at the instruction, we're thinking, how does that student learn? With AI, we can now dynamically respond to a student's needs. We can respond and adapt to a student's needs. And that's really important to apply AI to this, where we have many models right now that are online learning. We have hybrid, we have online, straight online learning. We know that there's a way to do this learning, that students do learn online, but now we can add this layer of adaptive learning. And now we can say through this whole systemic look with instruction, we can say, oh, all right, we gave it to the student one way and the student probably had an okay experience, but maybe not the best. So now do we do it in a different way, or do we do a thing in a different pedagogical strategy? Yes, we can do that with AI.
How? How do we do that?
We do that by prompting the AI with the engineering, but we have to train the AI on learning experience principles, learning science, teaching patterns, like all of this information that's together with the learning. And we can then adapt to the student and what the student needs according to what the student's done before, what the student has already learned.
Can you give me an example of something you would train the AI on?
So if we have, say, a scenario that we've got, currently, like scenarios would be, hey, here's a branching, it's a choose your own adventure. You can either choose A or B, and you can just go down these paths that are actually well-defined paths they seem dynamic, they seem adaptive, but in fact, you've got a defined path that you end up in. You're giving feedback at each of those little steps. So again, it feels like it's adapting. Now, we can have an actual scenario that does adapt to what the student needs. So here we are. Hello, student. Here's a scenario. What do you do now? The student can then respond, and then the AI can adapt to that response. Now, if a student has a hard time with the scenario, and you're like, okay, you didn't really learn that. It wasn't comfortable for you to learn it that way. Maybe now we have a Q&A moment. Maybe now we have a little bit of reading so the student can process it differently. And it could be that the student did really well with reading last time. So now we're going to maybe present that to the student as a reading kind of thing. And it feels a little more like read the book to learn, and then we're going to maybe quiz you on that. And then we're going to do another little bit of learning, and then we're going to quiz you on that. So now you've got a little bit of an adaptive thing going, but these are two different strategies for the same content.
And do you have the assessment going on at the same time?
So the way that would work, like if you think about a teacher who is literally standing in front of a classroom, which many of us know the one-to-many, here's one teacher teaching many, many students. The teacher might say, who in here knows the answer to, A or B? Or it's the Bueller moment, where it's like Bueller, finding that information somewhere in the classroom, and you can kind of take a little temperature of the classroom. That is assessing if someone's getting it. And if the teacher is actually listening to the students at that point, then they can, oh, okay, nobody's really getting it. I'm going to adapt this now and explain it a different way. Or I'm going to try and involve someone else in a different way. Maybe I'll even bring in a person who's had that experience to talk about it. So it does depend on the content that you're offering. But it's definitely an assessment, not a formal assessment, but an informal assessment as you're learning this and you're leading your students. With AI, we can now pull into the one-on-one relationship where the student is actually interacting with the AI individually, or maybe in a group, but individually you can have that assessment happening while the student is learning something. And if they're not learning it very quickly, you can slow down. If they're like, oh, I'm so bored, get me out of here, you can speed up. You can make it a little bit more difficult. You can even have the student understand, I'm going to ask it to be harder. I want to ask it to see what's the limits of what I can learn right now. So there's a lot of things that you can do. There are some things that we're looking at that are like not just the coaching, not necessarily just the pedagogy, but maybe also doing a peer-to-peer kind of discussion group. So those kinds of things are all options, all on the table whenever the student needs it.
So what you're describing here is a lot more complicated than what we typically see in the chat GPTs that are out there, or the gems as they're called in Gemini. So what does it take to actually build something like that?
Well, that's like the holy grail of AI, right? We're trying to train something that is trainable, but we are in charge of that training. So if we are looking at learning science-based instruction, which we are definitely wanting learning science-based instruction, we have to train it on learning science. We do have a partner, LDA, which is the Learning Design Alliance. With that partner, we're looking at a database of learning science-based theories, resources, references, teaching patterns, all of these different things that will be incorporated into the AI. That's how you train it. That particular thing can be used for curriculum, could be used for assessment, could be used for instruction, could be used for career. Like there's a bunch of things of like, oh, if you want a career that's going to go there, let's look at this learning resource and see maybe what patterns of instruction can we use that will get you there. It's especially important to think about the different types of instruction that we have. So if you're learning code, it's a very different way than if you're learning soft skills to be a manager. So all of these things have to be intact for that agent to work. We're also looking at multi-agent approaches.
I think you're going to have to explain these things.
Fair enough.
Okay. So what's an agent, and what does it mean to have a multi-agent?
Yeah, good question, because they're everywhere. People are going to be hearing about them. But kind of informally, people would call the agent a bot. And a bot, we don't like using that word because it sounds like meat, like Tweaky from Buck Rogers in the 25th century. It's not necessarily that it's just a robot. So it is an agent that we're training to interact with humans. A multi-agent approach is a way that you can get away from a huge agent that then tends to hallucinate and maybe make something up. And there's the famous, oh, how many R's are in strawberry? And it would answer 2 when there's in fact 3. There's how many, there's a bunch of different hallucinations that I could have. What's 2 plus 2? Oh, it's 5. It's not 1984, so let's stay away from that. When you have a very, very large agent, those are the problems you face. You don't want that in instruction. So you end up putting together a series of agents. Now, finding that is one of our little difficult questions that we've been trying to answer is like, what is the boundary of each agent? But they can refer to each other in a multi-agentic approach. So you have one agent that takes care of the pedagogy. You have another agent that goes and finds a resource. You have another agent that might do some assessment. We have another agent that does other things. So when you finally get this together in a very systemic way, you can actually have them talk to each other. And then it's even better for the student to interact with this agent. Because you can also bring in other like curriculum agents and try and figure out the other sort of career agent. Like I said, if someone has ideas to do something in a specific career, you can give the instruction to them with a layer of very relevant, here, you want to be a nurse? Here's a scenario for a nurse. But it has the same content driving behind it as someone who wants to be a manager of an office.
I've got my own AI tutor that I built and use for language learning. But we actually need to produce an AI tutor that can serve a lot of students, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of students at one time. How do you think about scale?
So this is such a huge question, and it's definitely beyond just instruction. We have to think about how are we sourcing all of the content? How are we coordinating that with all the assessment? How do you keep a bunch of this data all in a big old database? So scale is very important, but from a standpoint of instruction, we have to make sure that the learning science is there. So we have learning objectives, we have goals that we're getting to. They're going to align with competencies. We're going to keep all of that intact. And then we have that as a reference for all of these agents to go to. So when you have all of that intact, and then you rely on the learning science, the pedagogy, the different strategies of delivery, then you've got a huge possibility. The opportunities are there. So really it's data storage that is not going to be my problem. But there's a lot of instruction that you can do that is based on learning objectives, different content reaching those learning objectives, different pedagogy reaching those learning objectives. You still want to make sure you deliver the perfect content to that student at the perfect time that they need it. So basically, to wrap that all up, with scale, you actually just need to rely on the competencies, mapping everything back to the competencies. What are the learning objectives to those competencies? How do we teach to those competencies? And then move along to assessment and make sure we have mastery.
Yeah. So the way we make sure something, even though it's personalized, is still consistent, is to have it all tied to competency.
Exactly.
So what's the team's next big push?
So the next big push is actually looking at the boundaries of where the instruction agent is. There's a few different boundaries going on. So there's boundaries between the different components like instruction and assessment, instruction and curriculum, instruction and support, all of these things that overlap. Our boundaries need to be literally about instruction. So we are looking at different components that we can add to our instruction agent that are around coaching, which is kind of what we have now. We are looking at peer-to-peer discussions, which have been shown to like actually help folks in their growth mindset. Even peer-to-peer boards right now, I would say, are a little bit boring, right? Like if you post something on a discussion board, it's like, hey, who's having a problem with this? Oh, I am. But it's very much delayed. Sometimes it's just someone out of frustration posting that. But now we can have someone actually interact with this AI and say, oh, okay, here's a thing. I'm really frustrated with this. Oh, so am I. Now, not pretending to be a human, but it is a way to like bounce back and forth and say, oh, I can see why that's hard. that's, a lot of people, that's really common. That's a thing that people have struggles with. There's a lot of it with the pedagogy that we're looking back at the strategies of how we deliver. So it's finding these questions that are really, really difficult to answer, always basing it on the student, always basing it on the learning science.
Sounds like you're trying to make the experience feel much more dynamic for the student and the learner who are involved. I've often referred to chatbot and AI tutors as playing baseline tennis, question, answer, but now it sounds like you're finding ways to make it a much more dynamic experience. That's great. Well, we look forward to the updates. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
I really learned a lot today. I hope everybody else did too. Thanks for joining us for Inside the Learning Experience podcast. I'm Bethany Gross, and stay tuned for our next one. See you again.